everyone. My name is Irma Vasquez, and I am here to share with you my story of moving through this new period in my life that is known to many of us as, or maybe few of us, as perimenopause. So I decided to title this segment as, I've always been too much. And I think in order to really sort of talk about where it is that I am today as a woman, some of my background of what I've experienced as a girl is important to understand the context of where this title came from. So when I was a young girl, I was the age of 14 when when I had my first period. And coming from a Mexican parents, the topic of sex and sexual education just really did not come up, especially in the Catholic school from which I was a deep part of for most of my life. And the way that I learned about my period was when I went to the bathroom and suddenly saw blood coming out of my body. I remember going to my parents, who were like cozied up in bed, and just kind of said to them very carefully and cautiously that I thought I was dying. And my parents just sort of looked at each other. My mom directed me to the pantry to get for myself like a giant, huge maxi pad, and to throw that onto my panties and to basically not worry, because this was a part of becoming a woman. And so from that experience, then I moved on to discover. The only other thing that I also heard from my mom was that this meant that I could no longer like do the kinds of sports and activities, especially with my boy friends from the neighborhood that I was used to doing, because I was such a tomboy. So from the very start, there was this huge taboo around the conversation of sex, the separation, and the expectation that once menstruation flowed, that there needed to be a distinction and a separation from my childhood innocence and my relationship with men in general. None of that was really apparent to me until, of course, many years later, you look back and reflect on things and see some surprising factors that all play into things. Also, as a young girl, I discovered when my breasts were developing that I had much pain and lots of irritation in my breast tissue, and discovered that I essentially had like micro fibroids all over my breast that would be aggravated with the use of caffeine. Namely, then I was like hugely addicted to Pepsi Cola, as well as iced teas, which I turned to as an alternative, not really aware that it was just as loaded with caffeine. And so these little tiny like muscle tissue gatherings and fibroids existed all over my body at a very young age. So as my period developed then, and I kind of grew into my young adulthood, I noticed how erratic my periods would be. I had very, very very heavy bleeding, and my periods would also last for more than 7 days. And so as a result of that, I eventually became anemic. And I saw a doctor, and my traditional doctor's recommendation was to basically put me on the pill. Even though I wasn't having any sex, and I, had no worries of becoming pregnant, that was the recommendation, to control the bleeding and basically to regulate my system. And so I went on the pill for probably more than 20 years in my life, and consumed what I only partially was aware of how there's so many toxic chemicals that make up the pill. And over time, as I began to develop my practice and my internal healing practice through yoga and body awareness and understanding what it is that it's important is important for my body, did I realize that the pill was really just harming me much more than helping. So after many years with having, sort of like short-term relationships along the way, I've never been married, I don't have kids, I decided that I was going to take myself off the pill. And I did this without consulting my OB-GYN. It just felt like it was the right thing for me to do. And I stayed off of the pill for about a year. And for the first few months, my period actually it just continued to like stay on a regular monthly schedule. And it wasn't until about 6 months after being off of it that I started to notice irregularities again. So irregular bleedings. I'd have longer than usual periods. I'd have my period more than once a month, and I'd also start to experience a little bit more cramping and more pain throughout the month. And after seeing my traditional, so when this occurred, I had already been pretty deep into understanding the impact of food and how what I consumed into my body was either going to help me and heal me, or was going to be a toxin. And so I sought out my own, I did my own research to find what I could find, to find out the information that I could, that would help me address the situation. So the first thing that I learned was that because of my age, I was like already in my mid 40s, that I was experiencing very likely perimenopausal symptoms, which basically is a stage before you reach full menopause where you don't know what to expect. And that's like the craziest thing to me, is that after all of these generations of women aging and experiencing changes in life, there still is no real understanding of what to expect during perimenopausal stages. But that is because we're so unique and every one of us is entirely different. And after kind of getting my head around that, then I realized what's important here is for me to understand what my starting point was and where it is that I am right now, and how do these symptoms sort of relate to my stage in life, to the physical health in my life, and to the emotional settings that are around me. And what I learned in sort of like meditating and going inward with those questions was that it made a lot of sense that I was sort of like going into a full cycle of being a woman. I had come back to the stage of how I started, with erratic periods and just sort of like having, irrational like bleeding, and just having too many tissues in my body, too much blood flowing, too much, all the way around. So I went to go see a doctor, and my traditional OB-GYN, who I had been seeing for a few years already, was first of all very disappointed that I had come off the pill without notifying, and was also somewhat judgmental that I had chosen to see a Chinese doctor who'd given me this herbal remedy to control the bleeding that I was experiencing in my perimenopause state. So what had happened was that there was a period of time where I basically had my period, pun intended, for like 12 days straight. And during that period was what gave me the opportunity to really go inward and to communicate with my body and let my spirit and my body and the inner child in me and the sage all have a communication around what it is that we were experiencing. And so through that, let's see, so I went to the Chinese doctor and she gave me a remedy that was herbal based, and that controlled my bleeding. And it basically helped to regulate my period for another like 3 months or so. And then the irregular menstruation began again. So I went to go see my traditional OB-GYN and explained to her the whole like series of events and what I had been experiencing and what I tried. And first she was judgmental of my choice to see a Chinese doctor. And then secondly, her recommendations for me and in terms of like how to address the symptoms that I was facing was that she confirmed that I had fibroids that had been growing in my uterus, and that the fibroids were very likely the cause of the irregular bleeding, although it could have been my perimenopause state on its own. So with her diagnosis and assessment, the options that she recommended to me as far as treatment were first to say that there's nothing that can be done with controlling the fibroids or doing anything to eliminate them or to reduce them. And I already knew that was a very extreme suggestion or statement for treatment, because I had done enough research to know that there were treatments that were out there, that there were herbal remedies to try, that there were different ways to try to shrink a fibroid or to at least prevent its growth. And so hearing that immediately kind of tuned me into being very cautious of the remaining treatment options that she was to present to me, which continued to be one, that I go back onto the birth control pill, knowing already that for me that was not an option to dose my body up with toxins for the last few years of my life. Two was to have this procedure which basically involves some kind of non-invasive surgery that would essentially just help to regulate the bleeding, but it wouldn't address the fibroids themselves. The third option was for me to go in and to have a full-out hysterectomy. I asked her 2 or 3 times, were those the only options that she had to present to me? And she said yes. That no matter what it was that I tried or did, that there were no other ways to basically... Oh, and after the hysterectomy, she said there would be no guarantee that... So the hysterectomy would remove my entire uterus, and basically, like, that would be it. So, clearly to me, none of those options were acceptable. And further, I continued to move ahead and do like further research, and came across this doctor, this amazing OB-GYN who works with alternative medicine, and also did some research on my own, and I found specific herbs, and I found specific herbs in the form of teas, and I found also different kinds of like foods to include or exclude out of my diet that could impact not only my hormonal imbalance, but could also like minimize the chance that the fibroids would increase or would cause further pain, and would also like help to regulate my bleeding. And I began to apply all of those methods and try all of this new treatment from this new doctor. And I'm happy to say that in the last 6 months or so, over the last 6 months, I have brought my period down from having it be completely erratic to, maybe 2 or 3 times a month for 7 to 8 days at a time, to a regular cycle that is not only that not only begins and ends on a 7 day, a 7 day calendar, which is aligned with how my very first period began, but is also aligned to the moon cycle, which is how women's menstruation is intended to be aligned. We are female in origin, and as such, our energy is very much aligned to that of the moon. So as the moon wanes and waxes, our menstruation follows that same cycle. So this recovery, if I would call it that, is huge validation to me of how important it is to become aware of your own body. One, to take the opportunity to do your own research before relying on conventional, traditional medicine and their diagnosis, and to understand the range of options that are available to you, even if you're told that there are no others for you to consider. Thirdly, is that I've realized I've known this for a while, but it's been especially validated for me how important food is as medicine in our bodies. And just as important as it is a medicine to us, it also can be the toxin. So becoming aware of what it is that you're consuming and how you're consuming it and how your body responds to it is going to give you the signals of whether you're on the right track or not, as long as you take the opportunity to listen. One of the key herbs that has made like the world of difference for me. There's many that I've tried and I'm continuing to try, which includes like raspberry leaf as a tree, in a tea format. I've also used essential oils like clary sage and frankincense, and just kind of rubbing that right over my womb area and my uterus area at the time that I wake up and before bedtime. And then also an Ayurvedic herb, which is asparagus root called Shatavari. And I've been consuming that in a ghee format. There's a couple of different brands that I've tried. And Shatavari is known in Ayurveda as the woman with 1,000 husbands, because it helps to promote your female reproductive system. It helps if you are a woman that is nursing, or it also helps to just kind of regulate your hormones and your cycle. And it gives you the vitality for sexual pleasure, which I'd like to just close by saying, this stage in my life where most women would expect that, sexual pleasure is kind of out the window. For me, it's totally the opposite. I'm in a committed, loving relationship now with a partner, and the sexual pleasure that we've allowed ourselves to have has been honestly like the best that I've had in my life. And one of the additional things is that it's the first time that I'm ever allowing myself to have sex without any kind of artificial, artificial like condoms or artificial condoms or contraceptives. And this flesh on flesh sensual pleasure is one that I have never, ever experienced before. And so sometimes I say to myself, like, have I been missing out on this entire time? And I even joke with him about it. And it's not about anything that I've missed out on. It's about us coming together at this point in our life, with me going on 50. We're the same age. We're both turning 49 this year. And the two of us coming together at this point in this stage in our life and really allowing ourselves to enjoy our bodies in the moments that in the way that our bodies are as they are now. We're not trying to be teenage kids. We're not trying to be in competition or trying to do anything to impress one another. And so I'm very open with him about if I feel anything that feels unusual for me or anything that is uncomfortable. And he does the same thing in return. And that partnership that we have, that open communication that we have, is part of just what really contributes to the beautiful, vital, like, permission that we have to be sensual with one another, and we embrace it as we are. So I wanted to just thank you for listening to my story. I'll end with just a disclaimer that I am not a doctor. I am not promoting or suggesting that in any way you do not pay attention to your doctor. But my message is only that you pay attention to yourself, because nobody knows your body more than you do. And also that you allow yourself the opportunity to understand and do your own research in discovering what options are available to you. And if you're open and willing, experiment with different things. Just as easily as a doctor can prescribe like a pharmaceutical prescription to you, to try to, address a medical issue, you could also easily experiment with different, more homeopathic or natural or herbal or meditative types of forms of healing, and discover for yourself which ones work and which ones don't. Your intuition as a female power is extremely magical. And so I hope that all of you in this glorious stage of our lives that we're in, that you remind yourself of this magic that you have, and that you don't allow any concerns about age to hold you back from the experience that you're living. Because in every experience, even especially in the discomfort, there's things to learn. And there's a new level of information and of knowing of yourself that you can get to. So with that, thank you very much. If you're interested in knowing more about me and the practice and the work that I do, you could follow me on my website at www.chakratude.me. And that's Chakratude, which is all about charming your energy centers, your vital centers of life, with an attitude of energy. Ciao, ladies.